Good morning. I'm John Webster, 546A, Condo 14. I have heard the question of charging our less fortunate citizens to use the buses has been tabled. If that's true, I'm glad, as it deserves much more discussion. First, I want to say I truly regret heading my letter in the local papers with the words cheap. It was a very bad and angry decision. I should have said a lack of empathy and caring towards our neighbor citizens who use the bus. Second, I've had phone calls and comments. It is depressing how few respond to this issue and that a few misinterpreted my words. I didn't suggest a $2 increase as a partial solution for funding the buses. I only suggested that we might consider raising the suggested maintenance fee from $1 to $2. In addition, I'm not against appropriating money for a long-needed tennis court, even though my guess of $50,000 was probably $100,000 off. Use the equity fund. Give these tennis players what this village needs and which I didn't have years ago. Keep the village contemporary. I have heard that people who use cars, who have cars, use the buses to save gas. If that's true, it's despicable. If you drive your own car, you shouldn't be allowed to use the bus. If that seems to be a reason to cut off the bus for needy neighbors, it's up to the village to figure it out. It's not fair to punish all for the actions of one or two cheap people. I think the use of the word cheap here is adequate and acceptable. The next person to have to use the bus may be one of you trustees. Within the last 2 weeks, my cluster has had 2 people surrender their cars. Do you want them to move? This is their home. And one of those people who had to give his car up was a very active trustee at one time. Who among you or your spouses could be next? One last thought. And this is the heart of the matter as far as I'm concerned. Our country, our state, and now some of our heritage village citizens are so preoccupied with the fear of losing the value of their money that in a broader sense, they have lost their sense of humanity and community for those who are less fortunate.
Thank you, John.
My name is Walter Bornstein of Condo 24. When I spoke to the trustees last month, I remarked that the proposed ruling on fees for using vans was mean-spirited. When I listened to the discussion following on Channel 14, I realized that mean-spirited feeling was alive and thriving in Heritage Village. As to the alternatives discussed, the Southbury vans are not a viable option. I've used them a number of times. I've spoken to the people who work there, and they are already strained. They have two vans, a 10-seater and a 12-seater, both purchased with grant money. They are only for members of the senior center. One does only medical trips twice a week, the other varies. If our villagers started using the vans for medical trips on a regular basis, town residents would have no service at all because doctor's appointments are given priority in the Southbury vans. We would make more enemies in town than we now have, which we don't need. As for adding the van out of tax funds, hell will freeze over before that comes to pass, given our economic realities. As for Peapod, I've been using them regularly for over a year. You have to have a computer, and you have to know how to use it. You can't get it otherwise. It isn't free. If you order less than $100, it will cost you $11 in fees, and if you give the delivery man something even more. Levon is no improvement over this. It would take an hour on the telephone to try to get some kind of a discussion on what you want. As for taxis, they are not readily available and would not wait for you. The cost would be prohibitive. I have used Civic Association transport myself. They are a one-on-one thing, and you drive in someone else's car. They're intended mostly for out-of-town travel and not always available and depend on the kindness of our neighbors. The anger against non-drivers is misplaced and sad. Our society encourages use of public transportation, and you want to penalize those among us who do not or cannot drive. I drove for 60 years and do not need anyone to tell me of the cost of gas, insurance, and upkeep. We should be grateful for those who are willing to get off the road and make them safer. There are too many hopeless drivers on our village streets already, half blind, deaf, and unable to make their feet and hands function. We should not discourage them any more than we do. George Goodwin told me he thanked my wife and me for speaking out. He said he drives too many of them to the emergency room who shouldn't be driving. Last but not least, I never want to hear anyone point the finger at me and tell me they are subsidizing me when I use a van to go see my doctor, that I'm getting a freebie. I have been living in a Berkshire unit for almost 5 years, and I have been subsidizing those who pay far less, up to the tune of up to $2,200 a year. Never tell a Berkshire owner you are subsidizing him for anything. So please reject this mean-spirited charge, because if you don't, you will be opening up a Pandora's box where people will sit at the fitness center and count the residents. They will sit at the pools and count the residents, and everywhere else. You would be declaring open war and turning our peaceful village into a battleground in which no reasonable person